The morning Kade Quinn found the woman collapsed near Willow Creek. She was burning with fever so fierce he could feel the heat radiating from her skin before he even touched her. He had been checking his trap lines in the remote mountains of northern Nevada, miles from the nearest settlement of Winnemucca, when he spotted what he first thought was a wounded animal among the sage and rabbit brush. When he drew closer, his heart seized at the sight of a young woman lying motionless in the dirt, her dress torn and dusty, her dark blonde hair matted with sweat and debris. Kade dismounted from his horse in one fluid motion, his muscular frame moving with practiced efficiency despite his considerable size. He knelt beside her, his calloused hand gentle as he touched her forehead. She was burning up, her skin flushed and dry, her breathing shallow and rapid. He estimated she could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old, and out here alone in this condition, she would be dead by nightfall if he did not act quickly. "Madam." His deep voice rumbled as he carefully turned her onto her back. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. "Can you hear me?" No response came, only a soft moan that spoke of deep suffering. Kade made his decision in an instant. His cabin was a good 2 hours' ride from here, but it was her only chance. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, years of mountain living having built thick cords of muscle across his shoulders, chest, and arms. His dark hair, which fell past his collar, brushed against her face as he settled her carefully against his chest and mounted his horse with her cradled in one arm. The journey back was careful and slow, Kade holding the delirious woman steady while navigating the rocky terrain. She mumbled incoherently several times, words he could not make out, occasionally thrashing weakly against him. Each time he murmured low reassurances, his voice a steady rumble. "Easy now, I have got you. You are safe." When he finally reached his cabin, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The structure was solid and well built, constructed from thick logs and chinked carefully against the harsh winters. Inside was sparse but clean. A single large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with preserved foods and supplies, and a bed in the corner covered with furs and wool blankets. Kade laid the woman on his bed, immediately setting about building up the fire. The autumn nights were getting cold at this elevation, and despite her fever, she would need warmth. He filled a basin with water from his barrel, adding herbs he had collected and dried, yarrow and willow bark, both good for bringing down fever. As the water steeped, he carefully removed her boots, which were worn nearly through, and covered her with a lighter blanket. Her dress was filthy and torn in places, but he would not presume to change her clothes. Instead, he focused on bathing her face, neck, and arms with the cool herb-infused water, wringing out the cloth repeatedly as he worked to bring down her dangerous temperature. Hours passed. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out names he did not recognize, sometimes simply moaning in distress. Kade stayed beside her the entire time, changing the cool compresses, coaxing her to drink small sips of the willow bark tea when she was lucid enough to swallow, and keeping constant watch over her condition. "Please," she whispered at one point, her eyes opening but unfocused, seeing something that was not there. "I have to find them. Have to." "Hush now," Kade said softly, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he smoothed the damp hair back from her forehead. "You are not going anywhere right now. You need to rest and heal." "But they are waiting," she insisted, trying to sit up, her voice desperate and confused. "I promised I would be there, I promised." "Who did you promise?" he asked, trying to keep her talking, to perhaps glean some information about who she was and where she had come from. but she had already slipped back into unconsciousness, her body going limp against the pillows. Kade sighed, dipping the cloth in cool water again and laying it across her forehead. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her to be wandering alone and sick in the mountains, she was in no condition to provide answers now. The night stretched long and uncertain. Kade dozed occasionally in the chair beside the bed, but mostly he stayed awake, monitoring her breathing, changing the compresses, and adding wood to the fire as needed. He was no stranger to solitude, having lived alone in these mountains for the past 4 years, but there was something profoundly different about having another person in his cabin, especially one so vulnerable and dependent on his care. By morning, her fever had broken slightly, dropping from dangerously high to merely worrying. Kade allowed himself a small measure of relief as he checked her pulse, finding it stronger than it had been. He prepared a thin broth from dried venison and vegetables, hoping she might be able to keep something down. When she stirred again near midday, her eyes opened with more clarity than before, though confusion still clouded them. She looked around the unfamiliar cabin, her gaze finally settling on Kade where he sat at the table, mending a leather harness. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse and weak, but coherent. Kade set aside his work and moved to the bedside, his movements careful not to startle her. "My cabin about 15 miles northeast of Winnemucca. I found you yesterday morning near Willow Creek. You were burning up with fever." She tried to sit up, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture both firm and gentle. "Best you stay lying down for now. You have been very sick." "I do not." She stopped, her brow furrowing as she looked at him, then around the cabin again. "I do not understand. What was I doing at Willow Creek?" "I was hoping you could tell me that," Kade said, pulling the chair closer to the bed and sitting down. Up close, he could see her eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "What is your name?" She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching panic. I am not sure. That cannot be right." "Of course I know my own name. It is." But no name came. She pressed her hands to her temples, her breathing quickening. "Why can I not remember? What is wrong with me?" "Easy," Kade said, his deep voice calm and steady. "The fever was bad. Sometimes it can muddle the mind for a spell. It will likely come back to you as you recover." "But I do not remember anything," she said, her voice rising with distress. "I do not know how I got here, where I was going, who I am. How is that possible?" Kade reached out and took one of her hands in his much larger one, the gesture meant to ground her, to keep the panic from taking over. "Listen to me. Right now, the most important thing is that you rest and get your strength back. Memories can return, but you cannot heal if you are working yourself into a state of agitation." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, as if really seeing him for the first time. He was a striking figure, she realized, despite her current distress. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard growth, and dark eyes that held a surprising gentleness given his imposing size. His shoulders were incredibly broad beneath his wool shirt, and the hand holding hers was rough with calluses but warm and steady. "Who are you?" she asked. "Name is Kade Quinn. I have been trapping and hunting in these mountains for about 4 years now. Live alone, mostly. Trade furs and meat in Winnemucca when I need supplies. And you found me, brought me here," he nodded. "Could not very well leave you out there to die." She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice small. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." "Nothing good," Kade said honestly, "but you are safe now. That is what matters." Over the next few days, Kade tended to his unexpected guest with the same patient care one might give to a wounded animal, though he tried not to think of her in such terms. She was clearly well-bred, her speech educated despite her current state, her hands soft in a way that suggested she had not done much hard labor in her life. The mystery of what had brought such a woman into the harsh Nevada wilderness deepened with each passing day. Her fever continued to come and go in waves, though never again reaching the dangerous heights of that first day. During her more lucid periods, they would talk, though she could offer little in the way of information about herself. She knew general things, could identify objects and speak clearly, understood concepts and ideas, but anything specific to her own identity remained frustratingly blank. "It is the strangest feeling," she told him on the third day as she managed to sit up and take some proper food, a stew Kade had made from rabbit and root vegetables. "I know what a spoon is, what this stew is made from, that we are in Nevada, that this is the year 1882, but I cannot tell you my own name or where I come from. It is as if someone went through my mind and carefully removed only the personal details." Kade leaned against the table, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He had been giving thought to what they might call her, at least temporarily. "There were some wildflowers growing near where I found you. Primrose, I think. Would you mind if I called you that, at least until your memory returns?" She considered this, a small smile touching her lips for the first time since waking. "Primrose, I like that. It is better than being called her or the woman, I suppose." "Primrose it is, then," he said, returning the smile with a slight one of his own. As the days continued to pass, Primrose slowly regained her strength. Kade found himself adjusting to having company in ways he had not expected. He had chosen the solitary life deliberately after personal tragedy had driven him from his former existence as a ranch hand in Colorado, and he had grown comfortable with silence and his own thoughts. But Primrose brought something different to the cabin, a presence that was both soothing and unsettling in equal measure. She proved to be intelligent and curious, asking questions about his life in the mountains, about the animals and plants, about how he survived the harsh winters, and what his days typically looked like. He found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining his trap lines and hunting techniques, the best places to find medicinal herbs, the signs that told him when a storm was coming. "How did you come to live up here alone?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. She was wrapped in one of his spare blankets, her hair freshly washed and braided, looking considerably better than when he had found her nearly a week ago. Kade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Had a life before this," he finally said. "Down in Colorado, working on a ranch. Had a younger brother, too. He was just 17, full of enthusiasm and dreams." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "There was an accident. He fell from a horse, broke his neck, died instantly." "Oh, Kade," Primrose breathed, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "I am so sorry." "I blamed myself," he continued, his voice rough with old pain. "I was supposed to be watching out for him that day. Should have stopped him from trying to break that particular horse. Everyone said it was not my fault that accidents happen, but I could not shake the guilt. After he was buried, I could not stand to be there anymore, seeing the places we had been together, doing the work we had done side by side. So I came north, found these mountains, and started over. Is it better here? Has the time alone helped with the grief?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, at the genuine concern in her eyes, the compassion in her expression. "It has helped," he admitted. "Though I think I maybe took the solitude too far, tried too hard to cut myself off from feeling anything at all. Gets easier to be alone than to risk caring and losing again." Primrose nodded slowly, understanding crossing her features. But that is not really living, is it? Just surviving? No, he agreed quietly. I suppose it is not. The conversation seemed to shift something between them, creating a new level of intimacy and trust. Over the following days, Kade taught Primrose how to help with various tasks around the cabin, partly to give her something to occupy her mind and partly because he found he enjoyed her company. She learned to prepare furs for tanning, to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, to predict weather patterns by observing the sky and the behavior of animals. In turn, she brought warmth and laughter back into the cabin, her quick wit and observations often catching him off guard in the most pleasant ways. She had a gift for finding humor even in their strange circumstances, and more than once he found himself smiling or even chuckling at something she said, expressions that had been rare for him in recent years. 2 weeks after finding her, Kade made the decision to ride into Winnemucca, both to sell some furs and to see if anyone had reported a missing woman. Primrose insisted she was well enough to make the journey, and though he had reservations, he agreed. The ride would be long, but she seemed strong enough now, and staying isolated in the cabin would not help them solve the mystery of her identity. They set out early one morning, Primrose riding behind Kade on his sturdy mountain horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for stability. She could not help but notice the solid strength of him, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the steady confidence with which he guided them through the rugged terrain. Over the past weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of him as more than just her rescuer and caretaker, though she tried to push such thoughts aside given her uncertain circumstances. Winnemucca was a modest but bustling town, having grown up around the railroad that now connected the scattered settlements of Nevada to the rest of the country. Kade tied his horse outside the general store and trading post, helping Primrose dismount with a hand at her waist that lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Stay close," he said, his protective instincts clearly engaged now that they were around other people. "We will see what we can find out." Inside the store, the proprietor, a grizzled man named Silas who had known Kade for years, looked surprised to see the mountain man with a woman. "Well now, Quinn, this is unexpected," he said, his eyes moving between them with open curiosity. "Who is the lady?" "That is what we are trying to figure out," Kade said, launching into an explanation of how he had found Primrose and her subsequent memory loss. Silas scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "Have not heard of anyone matching her description gone missing, but let me ask around. In the meantime, you might want to talk to Doc Brennan. He deals with all sorts of ailments, might have some insight into this memory situation." They found the doctor in his office above the saloon, a thin, bookish man in his 50s who listened intently to Primrose's story and examined her thoroughly. After a considerable time, he sat back and removed his spectacles, cleaning them thoughtfully. "Medically, you seem to have recovered from the fever," he told her. "As for the memory loss, I have read of such cases, though they are rare. Sometimes a severe illness, particularly one with high fever, can damage the mind's ability to recall personal information. Sometimes the memories return on their own, sometimes they are triggered by familiar sights or sounds, and sometimes—" He hesitated. "Sometimes they do not come back at all," Primrose finished for him, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "It is too early to assume the worst," Dr. Brennan said kindly. "Give it time. Continue doing what you are doing, living your life, keeping your mind active. If the memories are there, they will likely surface eventually." As they left the doctor's office, Primrose was quiet, processing this information. Kade could see the worry in her expression, the fear of what it might mean if her memories never returned. On impulse, he took her hand, his large fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. "Whatever happens, you will be all right," he said firmly. "I give you my word on that." She looked up at him, something warm and complicated passing between them. "Thank you, Kade, for everything. I know this has disrupted your life considerably, and you have been nothing but kind and patient." "Truth is," he said, surprising himself with the admission, "having you around has been good for me. Cabin feels more like a home now instead of just a place to sleep between hunts." They spent the rest of the day in town, Kade conducting his business while also spreading word about Primrose's situation. Several people promised to keep an ear out for any information about missing persons, though no one recognized her or knew of anyone fitting her description who had gone missing recently. As the sun began to set, they started the journey back to the cabin. Primrose was tired from the long day, and she leaned against Kade's back as they rode, trusting him completely to keep her safe. He was acutely aware of her warmth against him, of her arms around his waist, of the way she fit against him as if she belonged there. When they finally reached the cabin, full darkness had fallen, and the temperature had dropped considerably. Kade helped Primrose down from the horse and could feel her shivering. "Get inside and start the fire," he told her. "I will take care of the horse and be right in." By the time he entered the cabin, she had a good blaze going and was huddled close to it, still shaking slightly from the cold. Without thinking, Kade went to her and wrapped one of the thick fur blankets around her shoulders, his hands lingering there as he looked down at her. "Better?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She nodded, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. They were standing very close now, closer than was probably proper, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings that had been building over the past weeks. Kade's eyes dropped to her lips, and he saw her breath catch slightly. "Primrose," he said softly, his hand moving from her shoulder to cup her cheek. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she whispered. "I know your circumstances are complicated, and I know you do not even remember who you are or where you came from. But I need you to know that I care about you. More than I probably should, given the situation. Having you here, getting to know you, it has made me realize how much I have been just going through the motions of living instead of actually being alive." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I cannot remember my past, but I know what I feel now. And what I feel when I am with you is safe and valued and—" She paused, gathering courage, "and cherished." Kade leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but quickly deepened as weeks of growing attraction and connection found their release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to stay," he said. "Even if your memory comes back, even if you remember a whole other life somewhere else, I want you to choose to stay here with me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever my past held, I want my future to be here with you." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Kade lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed as she wrapped her arms around his neck. And that night, they came together with a passion and tenderness that spoke of deep emotion and genuine connection. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together beneath the furs, Primrose traced the scars and lines of muscle across Kade's chest with gentle fingers. "I cannot believe I was lucky enough to nearly die in exactly the right place for you to find me," she said softly. He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest beneath her ear. "Strange how fate works sometimes. I spent 4 years avoiding any real human connection, and then you literally fell into my life. You think we are being foolish?" she asked, voicing a concern that had been in the back of her mind. Developing feelings so quickly given my situation, Kade was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking slowly through her hair. "Maybe," he admitted, "but out here you learn to trust your instincts. And every instinct I have says that you are meant to be here with me. The rest we will figure out as we go." The next morning brought the first substantial snowfall of the season, fat flakes drifting down from a heavy gray sky. Kade stood at the window, watching the world turn white, already mentally tallying what supplies they would need to get through winter if Primrose was staying, which she clearly was. "It is beautiful," Primrose said, coming to stand beside him, wrapped in one of his shirts that hung nearly to her knees. "I do not think I have ever seen snow before, or if I have, I do not remember it. Winters are long and harsh up here," Kade told her. "We will be snowed in for weeks at a time once it really sets in. Are you sure you want to stay? Town would be easier, more comfortable, more company than just me." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I am completely sure. Besides, I rather like the idea of being snowed in here with you." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then we had better get to work. We will need more firewood cut and stacked, more food preserved, extra blankets and warm clothes. I have most of what I need for one person, but two is different." They spent the following days preparing for winter, working side by side in a companionable rhythm that felt natural and right. Kade taught Primrose how to properly stack wood to keep it dry, how to smoke meat to preserve it, how to check and reinforce the cabin's defenses against the wind and snow. She proved to be a quick learner, and he found himself constantly impressed by her determination and resilience. One afternoon, while they were working outside, a rider appeared through the trees, approaching the cabin cautiously. Kade immediately stepped in front of Primrose, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt, his protective instincts flaring. The rider turned out to be a young man, probably not more than 20, wearing a deputy's badge from Winnemucca. He pulled up his horse a respectful distance away and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Mr. Quinn, I am Deputy Thomas Morgan. Sheriff sent me out here. We got word from Elko that matches the description of the woman you were asking about." Kade felt Primrose tense behind him, her hand clutching at his arm. "What kind of word?" he called back. "Lady named Patricia Wells went missing from a wagon train that passed through Elko about 3 weeks ago. She wandered off during a fever, and despite searching, they could not find her. Figured she had died out there somewhere. Description matches what folks in town told us about the woman with you. Patricia Wells." The name hung in the air between them. Primrose repeated it softly, testing it on her tongue. "Patricia Wells. I do not know. It does not feel familiar, but then again, nothing does." "Tell us more about this Patricia Wells," Kade said to the deputy, his arm wrapping protectively around Primrose's waist. Deputy Morgan consulted a paper he pulled from his coat. "Age 23, traveling with a wagon train headed to California. According to the report, she was a teacher from Philadelphia, had been hired by a family in Sacramento to tutor their children. Came down with a fever somewhere in the high desert, wandered off during the night while delirious. The wagon train master sent word back along the trail to watch for her, but after 2 weeks with no sign, they assumed she had perished. Her family has been notified of her presumed death." Primrose's breath caught. "A family? What family?" "Parents still living in Philadelphia, 2 younger sisters. No husband or children of her own. The report says she was making the journey west for employment and fresh start after a broken engagement." The information seemed to wash over Primrose in waves, and Kade could feel her trembling slightly. He held her tighter, his voice firm as he addressed the deputy. "Thank you for bringing this information. We will need some time to process this, figure out what to do next." "Of course. Sheriff says to tell you that there is no rush on anything. The woman is legally presumed dead already, so there are no urgent matters to settle. He suggests that if Miss Wells wants to contact her family, she might start with a telegraph to let them know she is alive, but that is entirely up to her." The deputy tipped his hat. "I will be heading back to town now. You folks take care." After the deputy left, Kade guided Primrose back inside the cabin, settling her in the chair by the fire. She sat staring into the flames, her mind clearly racing with this new information. "Patricia Wells," she said again. "A teacher from Philadelphia, a broken engagement, parents and sisters who think I am dead. It sounds like someone else's life, not mine." Kade knelt in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "It is your life, though, your past, your family. That much we know now. But I still do not remember any of it," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "Hearing facts about myself should trigger something, should not it? But I feel nothing. No recognition, no emotional response, nothing. The doctor said it might take time, that memories might come back gradually. This is just the first piece of the puzzle." She looked at him, tears gathering in her eyes. "They think I am dead, Kade. My parents, my sisters, they have spent weeks believing I died alone out here. I should send word immediately that I am alive, but—" She paused, a tear sliding down her cheek. "But what?" he prompted gently. "But doing that means eventually going back to a life I do not remember, to people I do not know anymore, to being someone I do not feel like I am. The only life I know, the only person I feel like I am, is who I have become here with you." Kade wiped away her tears with his thumbs, his touch achingly gentle. "Then we need to figure out what you want, not what you think you should do. Your family deserves to know you are alive, that much is clear. But what happens after that, what choices you make about your future, those are yours to make." Over the next several days, Primrose wrestled with her decision. Kade made it clear that whatever she chose, he would support her, even if that meant she decided to return to Philadelphia to try to reclaim her old life. But privately, his heart ached at the thought of losing her, of the cabin returning to its former lonely silence. Finally, one evening as they sat together after supper, Primrose spoke. "I want to send a telegraph to my parents, let them know I am alive, but I also want to be honest about my situation. I cannot pretend to be the daughter they remember when I have no memory of being her. I need to explain about the fever, the memory loss, and—" She paused, reaching for Kade's hand. "And I need to tell them that I have found a new life here that I want to keep." "Are you certain?" Kade asked, hardly daring to hope. "You would be giving up a lot. An educated life in a city, a teaching career, your family." "I would be choosing something better," she corrected. "A life with someone I love in a place that feels like home. As for teaching, well, I imagine there are children in Winnemucca and the surrounding areas who could use education. And my family, if they truly love me, will understand that I need to build a new life since the old one is lost to me." Kade pulled her into his arms, his relief and joy evident. "I love you too," he said, the words coming easily despite his usual reticence. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you have changed everything." They kissed deeply, and Primrose felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever her past had held, her future was here with this strong, gentle man who had saved her life, and then taught her how to live it again. The next day, they rode back to Winnemucca, and Primrose composed a carefully worded telegraph to her parents in Philadelphia. She explained that she had survived but suffered severe memory loss, that she was being cared for by a good man in Nevada, and that while she hoped to perhaps visit someday, she had decided to make a new life in the West. She asked for their understanding and blessing, and included instructions for how they could reach her through the Winnemucca telegraph office. It took nearly 2 weeks for a response to arrive. When the telegraph operator sent word up to the cabin that he had a message for Miss Wells, Kade and Primrose made the journey down together, both nervous about what her family's reaction might be. The telegraph was from her mother, and as Primrose read it, tears began streaming down her face. Kade immediately moved to comfort her, but she shook her head, smiling through her tears. "They are happy tears," she assured him. "Listen to this. Dearest Patricia, we are overjoyed beyond measure to learn you are alive. We had made our peace with your loss, so this is like having you returned from the grave. We understand about the memory loss and can only imagine how difficult this must be for you. Please do not feel obligated to return to a life you cannot remember. Your father and I always wanted you to find happiness, and if you have found it there, then that is where you should be. We would love to know more about the man who saved you and to perhaps visit when the weather permits travel. Your sisters send their love and many tears of joy. You are in our prayers always. With deepest love, Mother." Kade felt his own eyes stinging as he listened to the words. "That is good news, then," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Better than we could have hoped for." "They want to know more about you," Primrose said, looking up at him with love shining in her eyes. "What should I tell them?" "The truth," he said simply. "That you are in love with a mountain man who lives in the Nevada wilderness, who is rough around the edges but who would do anything to keep you safe and happy." "That is beautiful," she said softly. "But I think I will add that he is also incredibly kind, patient, and that he has the most remarkable muscles." She laughed at the rare sight of Kade actually blushing. As winter truly set in, Primrose and Kade settled into a comfortable domestic rhythm. The cabin became a true home, filled with warmth and laughter even as the snow piled deep outside. Primrose proved to be skilled at cooking and mending, while Kade taught her to shoot and trap, skills that would serve her well in their mountain life. On Christmas Eve, during a brief break in the snow, Kade took Primrose on snowshoes to a small clearing where the stars were brilliantly visible in the cold, clear sky. There, beneath the vast canopy of the heavens, he asked her to marry him, producing a simple but beautiful ring he had commissioned from a silversmith in town, designed with intertwining vines that reminded him of the Willow Creek where he had found her. "I know you are still legally Patricia Wells," he said as he knelt in the snow before her. "And I know you are still finding out who you are, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, whoever you choose to be, whatever you choose to call yourself. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him fiercely. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. And I think, if you do not mind, I would like to be Primrose Wells Quinn. Keep a piece of my old identity, but embrace the new one I have built here with you." They were married in early spring by a traveling circuit judge who came through Winnemucca. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in town with a handful of locals as witnesses, but it was perfect. Primrose wore a simple blue dress that she and Kade had selected together from the general store, and Kade wore his finest shirt and had even trimmed his beard for the occasion. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Kade swept her into his arms and kissed her with such passion and joy that the witnesses applauded and cheered. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple pleasures. Primrose did indeed begin teaching children in the area, starting with just a few families who heard she had been trained as a teacher back east, and eventually establishing a small school in Winnemucca, where she taught 3 days a week. The rest of her time she spent at the cabin with Kade, living the mountain life she had come to love. Her parents and sisters did visit, making the long journey west during the summer of 1883. It was emotional and strange for Primrose to meet family members she could not remember, but they approached the reunion with grace and understanding, focused on building new memories together rather than trying to force her to recall old ones. Her sisters, both younger and full of energy, fell in love with the wild beauty of Nevada and declared their brother-in-law to be wonderfully impressive and protective, which made Kade uncomfortable but pleased Primrose greatly. Small fragments of memory did return occasionally, triggered by unexpected things. The smell of a particular perfume brought a flash of her mother's dressing table. The taste of a certain kind of tea reminded her of sitting with her sisters. The sound of a piano playing sparked a memory of music lessons as a child. But they were just pieces, glimpses of a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else. The life that felt real, that felt truly hers, was the one she lived with Kade. In the autumn of 1884, Primrose discovered she was expecting their first child. Kade was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, his protective instincts going into overdrive as he worried about her health and safety throughout the pregnancy. He insisted she stop making the journey down to teach in town, and though she initially protested, she eventually agreed to take a temporary leave, teaching just a few students who could make the trek up to the cabin instead. Their son was born in the spring of 1885, delivered with the help of a midwife from town, and coming into the world healthy and squalling. They named him William, after Kade's late brother, and Kade wept openly as he held his son for the first time, feeling as though he had been given a second chance at family, at having someone to protect and raise and love. Primrose watched her husband with their baby and felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. This life, this family, this love was worth more than any memory she had lost, more than any former existence she could not reclaim. She had been lost and wandering when Kade found her, but he had done more than save her life. He had given her a reason to live it. As William grew from infant to toddler, the cabin often rang with his laughter and Kade's deep voice telling stories or singing old songs. Primrose would watch her husband and son together, seeing the gentleness with which Kade handled the boy despite his great size and strength, and fall in love with him all over again. In 1887, their daughter was born, a tiny girl they named Clara after Kade's mother. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined spirit, and from the moment she could crawl, she was following her older brother around, determined not to miss out on any adventure. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Kade built a beautiful addition that included a separate bedroom for the children and more storage space. He also built a small schoolhouse structure separate from the main cabin where Primrose could teach, and she resumed her work with students, bringing William along to learn alongside the other children. Life was full and rich and exactly what both of them had needed without knowing they needed it. Kade had healed from the loss of his brother, had found purpose and joy in his family. Primrose had built an identity from nothing, had created a self that was strong and capable and deeply loved. In 1889, Primrose received word that her father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Though she could not fully mourn the man she did not remember, she grieved for the loss her mother and sisters felt, and she and Kade took the children east for the funeral. It was a long and difficult journey, but important, and while there, Primrose was able to see the city where she had grown up, walk the streets she must have known, visit the school where she had been educated. Standing in front of the building where Patricia Wells had learned to be a teacher, Primrose felt a strange mix of distance and connection. She did not remember this place, but she could see how it had shaped her, had given her the skills and knowledge she now used to teach children in Nevada. "Do you wish you could remember?" Kade asked her as they stood there, the children playing nearby under the watchful eye of her younger sister. Primrose considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There are moments when I feel sad for what was lost, for the memories I will never have of my father, of my childhood, of the person I was before. But mostly, I feel grateful. If I had not gotten lost, if I had not fallen ill, if you had not found me exactly when and where you did, I would not have this life. I would not have you, or William, or Clara. And I cannot imagine anything in my forgotten past that would be worth trading for my present." Kade pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You are an extraordinary woman, Primrose Quinn." "Patricia Wells might have been extraordinary too," she said with a smile, "but I am glad I got to become Primrose instead." They returned to Nevada after the funeral, and life continued its steady rhythm. More children joined their family, a second son they named Henry in 1891, and then twin girls, Emma and Grace, born in 1893. Their cabin in the mountains was full of noise and life and love, a far cry from the silent refuge it had been when Kade had lived there alone. Primrose's school in Winnemucca grew and thrived, eventually becoming a proper institution with multiple teachers, though Primrose remained its heart and primary instructor. Kade continued his hunting and trapping, though as the years passed and the children grew, he spent more time guiding hunters and trappers than working the lines himself, finding he could make better money and have more time with his family that way. In 1895, Primrose was going through some old papers and found the original report about Patricia Wells' disappearance that the deputy had left with them years before. Reading through it again, she felt a sudden strange sensation, as if something was trying to surface in her mind. "Kade," she called to her husband, who was fixing a broken fence outside. "Come look at this." He came inside, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What is it?" "This report mentions that Patricia Wells was traveling to Sacramento to tutor children for a family named Abington." "Does that name mean anything to you?" "Cannot say that it does. Why, I do not know. It is the strangest thing. Reading that name, I felt something, not quite a memory, but an echo of something, a feeling of anger, resentment, something negative associated with that name." They wrote to her mother, asking if she knew anything about the Abington family. The response that came back was illuminating. According to her mother, Patricia had indeed been hired by the Abingtons, but her mother had been uncomfortable with the arrangement. The family had been demanding and had offered very low pay, and her mother suspected they were looking for someone they could take advantage of. Patricia had accepted because she was eager to leave Philadelphia after her broken engagement, but her mother had worried about her daughter being so far from home with employers who might not treat her well. Reading this, Primrose felt relief rather than regret. "I wonder," she said to Kade, "if some part of me, even while delirious with fever, knew I did not want to get to Sacramento, did not want to work for these people. Maybe wandering off was not entirely accidental. Maybe it was an escape." "So you think your unconscious mind was trying to save you from a bad situation?" "Perhaps. Or maybe I am looking for meaning where there is just random chance. Either way, I am grateful for how things turned out." As their children grew, Kade and Primrose made sure to tell them the story of how they had met, of how Primrose had been lost and found, had forgotten everything but had built a new life through determination and love. The children found the story endlessly fascinating, and it became family legend, told and retold with different embellishments depending on which child was doing the telling. William, their eldest, grew to be tall and strong like his father, with the same protective instincts and quiet strength. He eventually became a deputy in Winnemucca, dedicated to helping others the way his father had helped his mother. Clara developed her mother's intelligence and love of teaching, taking over more responsibilities at the school as Primrose grew older. The younger children each found their own paths, but all remained close to home, drawn by the love and security that filled their family. In 1900, Kade and Primrose celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children arranged a party in Winnemucca, inviting everyone who had been part of their lives over the years. The celebration was joyful and loud, full of music and dancing and storytelling. Late in the evening, Kade and Primrose slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to the edge of town where they could see the mountains rising in the distance, the peaks silvered by moonlight. "You ever regret it?" Kade asked, echoing the question he had asked years before. "Staying here with me instead of trying to reclaim your old life," Primrose laughed softly. "After 15 years, 5 children, and more happiness than I could have imagined, you are still asking me that. I suppose I want to make sure you are still certain, still happy." She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his bearded cheek in her hand. His hair was showing threads of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first truly seen him, looking down at her with gentle concern as she lay fevered in his bed. "I have never been more certain of anything," she told him firmly. "You gave me life, Kade Quinn, in every way that matters. You found me when I was lost, cared for me when I was vulnerable, loved me when I was confused and frightened and did not even know my own name. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "I love you, Primrose," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day I love you more than the day before. You took a man who was just going through the motions and made him truly live again." "We saved each other," she said simply, and kissed him beneath the stars, the same stars that had shone down on them that night he proposed, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. As the new century dawned, Kade and Primrose settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle age. Their children were mostly grown or growing, their lives were stable and secure, and the love between them had only deepened with time. They had become respected members of the community, known for their generosity and kindness, their door always open to those in need. Primrose's memory never fully returned, though over the years various fragments had surfaced, and she had made peace with the parts that remained forever lost. She had long since stopped thinking of herself as Patricia Wells, a woman from Philadelphia with a forgotten past. She was simply Primrose Quinn, wife, mother, teacher, and friend, a woman whose life truly began the day she woke in a mountain cabin with a gentle giant watching over her. In 1905, when Primrose turned 46, Kade took her back to the spot where he had found her 23 years before. The Willow Creek still ran clear and cold, and primrose flowers still grew along its banks. They stood together in the spot where her new life had begun, surrounded by the wild beauty of the Nevada mountains. "Thank you," Primrose said softly, "for not riding past that day, for stopping, for caring, for taking a chance on a half-dead stranger." Kade wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "It was the best decision I ever made," he said. "Finding you that day was like finding a piece of myself I did not know was missing." They stood there for a long time, remembering and grateful, before finally riding back to the cabin that had sheltered their love through all seasons, through all challenges, through all the years of their lives together. As they grew older, Kade and Primrose became the wise elders of their community, the couple that younger people looked to as an example of enduring love and partnership. They told their story to grandchildren who sat wide-eyed and fascinated, and those grandchildren would later tell it to their own children, keeping alive the tale of the mountain man who found a lost woman and loved her back to life. In 1920, Kade passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. He had lived a long and full life, had seen his children and grandchildren thrive, had loved and been loved in return. Primrose was heartbroken but not devastated, for she knew that what they had shared was rare and precious, and that she had been blessed beyond measure to have had him in her life for so many years. She lived another 8 years, remaining sharp and active until the end, still teaching occasional lessons and tending her garden and spending time with her large extended family. When she finally passed in 1928 at the age of 69, it was with a smile on her face and her hand clasped in her daughter Clara's, her last words a whispered, "Tell your father I am coming home." She was buried next to Kade on the mountainside overlooking Willow Creek, where the primrose flowers bloomed every spring. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: "Here lie Kade and Primrose Quinn. He found her. She found herself. Together they found love." Their children and grandchildren continued to visit the grave site for generations, bringing wildflowers and telling stories, keeping alive the memory of a love that had transcended circumstance and adversity, that had proved that sometimes being lost is simply the first step to being found. The cabin still stood decades later, preserved by the family as a memorial to their parents and grandparents, a testament to the truth that home is not always where we start, but where we choose to stay, and that the greatest love stories are often the ones we write ourselves, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage and compassion at a time. And so the story of the mountain man and the woman with no memory became legend in that part of Nevada, passed down through the years as an example of kindness and courage, of second chances and new beginnings, of love that asks nothing except the opportunity to prove itself true. It was a story that reminded people that who we were matters less than who we choose to become, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the chance to start over, to build ourselves anew, to find in the wilderness of loss and confusion a new path toward meaning and belonging. Their descendants kept the story alive, embellishing it sometimes but always keeping its heart intact. The simple truth that Kade Quinn found Primrose wandering confused and fevered in the mountains, brought her back to his cabin, stayed with her as she struggled to remember, and in the process of helping her find herself, found his own lost heart and learned to love again. It was a story of healing and hope, of patience and perseverance, of two broken people becoming whole together. In the end, that was what made their story so enduring and so beloved. Not that it was extraordinary or impossible, but that it was human and real, that it spoke to the deep need we all have to be seen and known and loved for who we truly are, not who we used to be or who others expect us to be. Kade saw Primrose not as a lost woman from Philadelphia, not as a teacher who had forgotten her training, not as Patricia Wells with a broken past, but as simply herself, whoever that turned out to be, and he loved all of her unconditionally. And Primrose, in turn, saw past Kade's isolation and rough exterior to the tender, wounded heart beneath, saw the man who had been hiding in the mountains from grief and guilt, and she loved him back to connection and purpose and joy. They healed each other, saved each other, and built together a life that neither could have imagined but both came to treasure beyond words. Their love story was not one of instant passion or dramatic gestures, though it had its share of both. It was instead a story of daily choices, of small kindnesses repeated over and over, of patience and understanding, of learning to trust and be vulnerable, of building intimacy slowly and steadily until it became unshakable. It was a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply by choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. And that, more than anything, was why their story endured, why it was told and retold, why it mattered not just to their descendants but to everyone who heard it. Because it proved that love can find us even in our darkest moments, even when we are lost and alone and have forgotten who we are, even when we think we are beyond saving or unworthy of being found. It proved that one act of kindness can change everything, that one person caring can make all the difference, that we all have the power to save each other if we are brave enough to try. The mountains of Nevada still stand as they did when Kade found Primrose, wild and beautiful and unforgiving. Willow Creek still runs cold and clear, and primrose flowers still bloom along its banks each spring. And if you listen carefully when the wind blows through the valley, you might hear echoes of their story in its whisper, a reminder that love is always possible, that we can always begin again, and that sometimes the greatest adventure of all is simply being brave enough to let ourselves be found.